I don't actually know how to be alone. And I've had a lot of periods where I'm like single, but I don't think I was actually energetically alone. And the intention behind it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to try to be single. It's kind of just like the situation was happening to me. So I think a really good quote that sort of aligned with what I'm feeling is, it was something like, you don't choose solitude, it chooses you. And I think the way out of solitude is to actually choose it back. So currently for me, moving forward into 2025, I think the idea is to choose solitude back and to really come from that place of, okay, if I'm going to spend time alone, if I'm actually going to be alone, let's see what I can find and let's see what I can create in this space. I think in the past, it's always been a bit more of a reluctant aloneness, a reluctant solitude. And although I was alone, I still had a lot of, energetic connections with other people. So I think this year I'm going to see what I can find if I just go all in on myself and I really sort of look for myself in this solitude that I find, right? Because I think when you're actually alone and when you have nobody to text and you have nobody to talk to, that's when the stuff really is going to come up and you're actually going to be able to process these things. Spending time alone is often seen as this sort of punishment, but I think, especially because I've seen it that way, I think this year the big reframe is to actually look at it differently and say, hey, like, what else is here? Is it possible for me to sort of view this in another way and sort of see what comes up? So I'm really going to be seeing 2025 as an opportunity to go into the solitude and see what's there, because for the longest time I've been really, really used to like chasing after connection or chasing after some other sort of thing to satiate my own emotional needs. So I made a video about this where I talked about how in the new season of Squid Game, the recruiter basically makes them choose between two things. They either choose the bread or they choose the lottery ticket. And being 100% honest, I tend to choose the lottery ticket. So if you don't know what I mean by the analogy, essentially the bread is a sort of is the self-care, it's the small consistent actions that you take over time that are going to build up and build your self-esteem, build your emotional security, and satiate your emotional hunger. But obviously the bread is boring because it's not like an immediate payout. We don't know what it's going to sort of come to bear if we keep doing it, right? Because if you keep choosing the bread, or if you keep choosing self-care and you keep choosing yourself in the present moment, it might not seem like a lot, but in the long run, it's really going to pay off and you're really going to be able to feel it. The lottery ticket, on the other hand, is like a situationship or like an ex or some sort of far off fantasy. And generally, the reason why we choose that is because there's something in our present life that we're not fully okay with and not fully accepting. So we project onto this person some kind of fantasy, some kind of delusion, because we think it's going to fix us or it's going to change something. And that essentially is the mistake that we make. So personally for me, as I came up with that analogy, I realized whether it's like situationships, crushes, or et cetera, I was creating or projecting this fantasy in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, if we got together, it's going to be amazing, right? So if like they like my story, I'd be like butterflies, So I think the recognition and the intention for me moving into 2025 is learning how to be like, wait a second, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to realize that I've been choosing the lottery ticket, and this year I think I'm going to choose the bread, which is going to be the boring way, which is I'm going to take the small consistent actions. I'm actually going to spend time with myself energetically. And this is the key important thing. You can be alone, you can be single, but if you're not energetically choosing that, it's not the same thing, right? Because I've been single and I've been alone many times before for many years. But the difference is, I think, the energetics and the intention behind it. So the intention moving forward is I'm going to actually choose the bread or choose myself. So what does that mean? I think for me, that means going all in on the stuff that I want to do rather than being in that waiting energy. So if you are sort of self-aware, you can actually see that when you're in that sort of state of emotional hunger, you're almost like waiting for people to give you approval, or you're waiting for people to do things. So a good example of how that's shown up in my life is I've always wanted to do like a lot of stuff, right? Whether it's like bungee jumping, skydiving, a lot of adventurous things, because I find it very fun. But in the past, I've held myself back really strongly because I'm like, oh, I want to do this with some person, right? So it's always, I'm waiting for somebody else to come join me to do this thing because I want to share the experience of fun. Never really doing things and sending things for myself. So again, I think the mantra for 2025 is all in. It's time to go all in on myself, which means doing the stuff I want to do, buying myself stuff that I want to buy, and really, really diving into that of like, okay, if this is the person I'm spending the rest of my life with, the person in the mirror, I'm going to make it so that we have a really good relationship. And I've spoken about this stuff before, and it does feel a bit hypocritical that I've spoken about self-love and all this kind of stuff so much, but now I'm really actually have to like, okay, let's put everything that I've talked about into practice. Let's really send this all the way, because it's not really apparent until you fully spend time in solitude, until your energy is completely alone. They're like, okay, maybe I haven't been fully practicing that. I think I've been so used to having these really loving connections with people that I don't fully get to experience this of this level of, okay, I'm just here for me now. I'm gonna go all in on myself, and that's essentially the plan for 2025. So if you've been alone before, but you've never really been energetically alone, and hopefully you can understand the sort of distinction there. Energetically alone basically means that you're not tied energetically to someone. So that means you're not planning out some fantasy with some situationship, or you're not attaching yourself to some outcome where they say yes or they choose you back. Essentially, energetically, it's just you. And that includes having like these kind of situation talking stages and these kind of things, because even then that's like an energy leakage. So to actually be energetically single is to just be, hey, this is me, I'm just me right now, and I'm focusing me. And if you are in this sort of stage of being energetically single, it's important now to actually dive in. This is really where the key opportunities are. This is where you really meet yourself. You figure out what you like and what you don't like. Figure out what it means to live alone, and to go seek out and do the things that you actually care about, and really find yourself. So I think it takes a level of courage and bravery to really be yourself. And I think that's the opportunity of 2025 for me. It is learning how to be, and learning how to just dive into what it is that is going to define me, and really rediscover and relearn who I am. So I think this is a big distinction and a big sort of reframe in healing. Healing isn't about learning something new. Healing is about unlearning a lot of the things that you've already known but don't necessarily align with you. So I think the analogy they use is it's kind of like an onion. You're like peeling back the layers until you see what the onion isn't. And so for yourself and during the healing journey, it's really peeling back all these layers, whether it's like cultural conditioning, conditioning from your parents, conditioning from society, conditioning from religion, all of these things that have been attached to you. It's peeling the layers back and actually diving into who you are in essence, and then figuring that out. So for me, I think this is really where I'm starting to like shed off all these layers, really experience almost sort of like a spiritual death in some sorts, and see like, okay, maybe that's not me. Maybe these are things that I believe to be me, but are not fully aligned with what it is that I'm trying to create, who it is that I'm trying to be. And I'd like to actually find out. I'd actually like to see what's there. So something that comes up for me, and something that will come up for a lot of people on this sort of journey, is there's a lot of fear, which is, what if I'm alone for the rest of my life? What if nobody loves me? And the reason why I'm kind of laughing is because like that is such a common thought, especially for me going into this journey. I'm like, what if I just like never find love? What if I'm like destined to be alone? and valid, real as hell. That feeling is so normal, and I think that's really what the journey is about, right? Because the moment you start to be energetically alone, these feelings are going to come up. And what do they reveal to us? Well, they reveal to us our innermost desires, our innermost needs. And again, remember, there's no sort of wrong here. We're not trying to punish ourselves for feeling a certain way. We're just trying to look at what's there. We're just trying to see, hey, like, this feeling is coming up, and like what does it mean to me, and what am I going to decide to make it? So personally for me, when these feelings come up of, oh no, what if I never find love again? What if somebody doesn't love me back? What I'm really sort of seeing and what I'm really sort of feeling is, what if somebody doesn't? Can I still give myself the same love? Can I still feel sufficient? Can I still give myself the grace and the compassion I would give myself if somebody did love me back? And I think that's the important question to answer. So it's less about, oh, like, is somebody actually going to, because we can't actually predict the future. We don't know what the future is going to be. And if that is the case, if I'm doomed and destined to be alone, that sucks. But at least I'm going to choose myself first. And I think that's really the important lesson for me, which is I would like to be able to choose myself regardless of what sort of outside circumstances tells me. And that's sort of the goal where, hey, you know, if I'm going to spend this time alone, if my journey here, which let's be honest is a very short amount of time, is going to be spent alone, okay, I'm going to at least make it a nice journey. I'm going to make it a good time. So I'm going to spend that time really getting to know myself on a deep level and understand myself in essence, rather than chasing after this sort of validation. So something I've said before is that we often have limiting beliefs, and rather than let go of our limiting beliefs, we chase after a validation against it. So a good example is, like, if I believe I'm not enough, instead of letting go of the idea that I'm not enough, I'll instead rather chase after somebody, hoping that, hey, if they choose me back, that means I've disproven that belief that I'm not enough. But that's not actually how it works. So, and what you'll notice is that if you try to chase after a validation against a limiting belief, you'll often reinforce it more. For example, somebody who feels really poor, they're going to keep chasing after money, and the more money they make, the more poor they actually feel. So that's really the huge distinction here, where it's instead of chasing after the validation against it, the intention is to go into it and to really let go of it. So if I feel like I'm unlovable, if I feel like nobody's going to love me, the point isn't to go find someone to love me. The point is to look at the parts of myself that believe that and ask myself, why do I feel so unworthy and unlovable in the first place? And is that something that I'm willing to let go of, and then sort of get into that process? So when it comes to the idea of being alone and these sort of thoughts coming up, I think it's important to realize, first of all, where they're coming from, and then the intention with how we actually approach it. So it's less about solving the thought or solving the belief, but learning where it's coming from and then releasing that. So to sort of get a bit more into the shadow work and the inner work side of things, when we have these limiting beliefs like, oh, I'm not enough, I don't deserve love, I'm not lovable, etc., where it's really coming from is a wounded place. So to let go of it, we have to first identify where the wound is actually originated. So I can give like a personal example for me. It's like, let's say I believe I'm unworthy of love or I'm not enough, right? So maybe I can think back to an example in middle school and elementary school where I had a crush and I asked them out and they rejected me. So what comes up for me, or that version of myself, is that version of myself felt, especially because when you're younger, you don't have the proper tools for emotional regulation. But that version of me decided, hey, because this outcome happened in this way, I've decided to make this mean something about myself. And this is the huge reframe, which is learning how to take responsibility for the belief systems that you have. And when we speak of taking responsibility, people often mix these two things up. Taking responsibility has nothing to do with saying, oh, what happened to me was okay. Because it definitely is the case that things may just happen sometimes and they're out of your control. The responsibility comes when you're taking responsibility for the beliefs you formed about yourself because of the circumstances, right? So getting rejected, out of my control. Getting rejected and believing it's because I'm not enough, completely within my control, at least now. So the inner work to really let go of that is to go back to these versions of myself, tend to these versions of myself, and realize, hey, this version of me was always enough. This version of me was always lovable. It just happened that it wasn't aligned with a particular person on their area of their journey, their part of their journey. So letting go of that is recognizing where it came from and reintegrating that. Even in a way, forgiving yourself for believing that about yourself. So the key point, okay, to hammer it home is to recognize where we're coming from when we form these belief systems, and to take responsibility for forming those belief systems, question those belief systems, and then through sort of, healing, breath work and meditation, slowly let them go and realize, you know what, maybe that's not true. And it's really opening yourself up to the willingness of it and being able to be like, hey, maybe this isn't true, and I'm going to be willing to let go of it. All right, I think that's all I have to say for today. So I will see you in the next video.